This is Off the Cuff, and I'm Steve from TorahFamily.org. Quick question for you. Do you worship God, Yahweh, in His ways or yours? While that may sound like a silly question to some, I believe it's something we need to seriously consider. Some might say, well, what's it matter, as long as we're giving Him worship, right? Well, wrong. Yahweh was actually pretty specific in how He wanted to be worshipped and not worshipped. Let's read what He gave us. Deuteronomy 12, starting in verse 1. These are the statutes and rules that you shall be careful to do in the land that Yahweh, the God of your fathers, has given you to possess. All the days that you live on the earth, you shall surely destroy all the places where the nations whom you shall dispossess served their gods. On the high mountains, and on the hills, and under every green tree. You shall tear down their altars, and dash in pieces their pillars, and burn their asherim with fire. You shall chop down the carved images of their gods, and destroy their name out of that place. You shall not worship Yahweh your God in that way. So, we shouldn't worship Yahweh with any of their ways or traditions. Knowing Yahweh stays the same and doesn't change, we need to be cautious of the traditions we use to worship Him. Just as much as He established this in the Torah for His people to follow, we see He continues with the Torah in the millennium. Isaiah chapter 2 discusses the time when all will come and learn to walk in the law, the Torah, during the millennium. This is seen here in verses 2 through 4, a time when there will be no more war. The ways of Yahweh are established. They're not here for one era, gone another, and then return at the end. They're eternal, as noted here in the Psalms. Psalms 119, 160. All your words are true. All your righteous laws are eternal. And also, as Isaiah the prophet says, Isaiah 40, verse 8, the grass withers and the flowers fall, but the word of our God stands forever. So, I sincerely believe we need to examine our traditions and make sure they don't contradict His eternal word. Traditions can be good and fun. However, Yahweh is very specific that those traditions we use to worship and remember Him don't come from how the pagans worshiped their gods. And we need to make sure the traditions we make ourselves don't contradict His Torah either. So, we need to be careful of what traditions we follow. Consider what the prophet Micah says regarding judgment coming on Israel because of the ways and traditions they started following. Micah 6, verse 16. You have observed the statutes of Omri, and all the practices of Ahab's house, and you have followed their traditions. Therefore, I will give you over to ruin, and your people to derision. You will bear the scorn of the nations. Judgment came because they followed the ways and traditions that weren't of Yahweh. So, who is Omri and Ahab that's mentioned here? We see they had statutes, practices, and traditions that were obviously evil in the eyes of Yahweh. These were two kings who reigned in the northern kingdom of Israel. We see this of Omri in 1 Kings 6:25. But Omri did evil in the eyes of Yahweh and sinned more than all those before him. Then we find Ahab was his son, and we see this said of him. 1 Kings 16:29. In the 38 years of Asa, king of Judah, Ahab, son of Omri, became king of Israel, and he reigned in Samaria over Israel 22 years. Ahab, son of Omri, did more evil in the eyes of Yahweh than any of those before him. These were two kings who were taking the ways of the nations and incorporating them into their kingdom. The northern kingdom broke off from Judah after King Solomon. Jeroboam was the one who led the northern kingdom in revolt. Jeroboam was the one who started mixing the ways of the nations into the northern kingdom. He didn't want anyone in his kingdom to travel to Jerusalem to make sacrifices there as the law prescribed. So he did all he could to make sure that wouldn't happen. Let's read from 1 Kings chapter 12, starting in verse 26. Jeroboam thought to himself, "The kingdom will now likely revert to the house of David. If these people go up to offer sacrifices at the temple of Yahweh in Jerusalem, they will again give their allegiance to their lord Rehoboam, king of Judah. They will kill me and return to King Rehoboam." After seeking advice, the king made 2 golden calves. He said to the people, "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. One he set up in Bethel, and the other in Dan. And this thing became a sin. The people went even as far as Dan to worship the one there." This is where many say the northern kingdom completely abandoned Yahweh and started serving other gods. But that's really not true. Notice what Jeroboam said to the people regarding the golden calves he had made. "It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Here are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." The focus of this statement wasn't on different gods. It was on being able to serve the same from a different place and in a different way. The common reply here is, "But Steve, Jeroboam said, 'Here are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt.' He didn't say, 'Here is your God.'" What many don't realize is, this is the exact same Hebrew word Yahweh ascribes to himself when talking to Israel. This is seen here in Exodus chapter 20, verse 5. It's also seen here in Deuteronomy chapter 2, verse 7. The Hebrew is the exact same. So Jeroboam was telling them they could keep serving Yahweh, but just not have to travel to Jerusalem to do so. He didn't make new gods for them. He knew the people still wanted to serve Yahweh. His concern was how they may want to go to Jerusalem to do just that under the king of the southern kingdom. So he made idols to represent Yahweh. He was making new ways and traditions that was likened to the ways and traditions of the pagan nations, worshiping their gods through the mediation of an idol. Does this element of the golden calves sound familiar? Well, it should. This was the same sin Israel did when they thought Moses was never coming back down from the mountain. They made a golden calf. Now, many try to apply the same argument of Israel serving new gods here in 1 Kings to the golden calf incident in Exodus. But the issue wasn't them serving new gods found in the Exodus account either. The issue was trying to serve Yahweh in the way other nations served their gods, through the mediation of idols of them. Look what's said at the golden calf incident. Exodus chapter 32, verse 4. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." Did you know this word for gods here is the exact same we looked at earlier? Look what was said right before they made the golden calf. Exodus 32, verse 1. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses, who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." Did you know the exact same word for gods here is also found here? Genesis 1:9, Genesis 1:11, Genesis 1:14, Genesis 1:24, Genesis 1:28, and Genesis 1:29. From the book of Exodus, Exodus 3:13, Exodus 13:17, and Exodus 14:19. All the exact same as seen here with the golden calf incident. So they weren't trying to make new gods. They wanted a representation for Yahweh. They just saw Yahweh deliver them. They knew who delivered them. That wasn't the issue or the question at hand. It was Moses, their mediator, who was missing. They thought something happened to him. In fact, their exact words were, "As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." They didn't say, "We don't know what happened to Yahweh." No, they were questioning what happened to Moses. He was their mediator to Yahweh, but they thought he went missing. So they made themselves a new mediator, an idol that they could pray to, something Yahweh told them to specifically not do. Again, it was Moses who they didn't know what happened to. So they wanted a mediator to look to in place of Moses. So they chose to make an image of Elohim, the exact same word used for Yahweh on multiple accounts in Genesis and Exodus up to this point. This was the custom in Egypt. They made idols that they served as the mediator to the God it represented. In their eyes, they weren't abandoning Yahweh when they made the golden calf. However, they were breaking the command of making an idol to him. Why? Because that was what they were used to. He delivered them out of Egypt, yes, but Egypt was still in them. In fact, this is exactly what Stephen said about them in the book of Acts. Their hearts turned back to Egypt. Not to the gods of Egypt. I want to make that clear, but to the ways of Egypt. Let's read it. Acts chapter 7, verse 39. But our fathers refused to obey him. Instead, they rejected him and in their hearts turned back to Egypt. They told Aaron, "Make us gods." Again, in the Hebrew, the word was Elohim as used for Yahweh. Continuing, "Who will go before us? As for this fellow Moses who led us out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." That was the time they made an idol in the form of a calf. They brought sacrifices to it and held a celebration in honor of what their hands had made. But God turned away and gave them over to the worship of the heavenly bodies. The heavenly bodies. This could imply the constellations. Thus, the golden calf could be the constellation we know of today as Taurus. Continuing on. This agrees with what is written in the book of the prophets. Did you bring me sacrifices and offerings 40 years in the desert, O house of Israel? You have lifted up the shrine of Molech and the star of your god, Rephan, the idols you made to worship. Therefore, I will send you into exile beyond Babylon. The interesting thing here is, in both accounts of Exodus and 1 Kings 12:28, we see they set up a bull. Stephen's account in Acts says they turned back to Egypt in their hearts. The god that was a bull and was worshipped in Egypt was an Apis bull. In Egypt, the Apis bull was considered sacred and worshipped as a symbol of strength and power. This bull was believed to be the earthly incarnation of a god. It was a manifestation of the Memphite creation god, Ptah, and I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. It was herald of Ptah, a messenger god, if you will. This image you see here was taken from a friend of ours at the base of Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia in 2020. You can see it matches images of the Apis bull found in Egypt. Knowing the Apis bull god was a symbol of a powerful servant, how fitting it was for them to make this their new mediator to Yahweh to replace Moses. Plus, knowing it was the bull they chose, it's no surprise they eventually started serving Molech of the Canaanites. It was also a god in the shape of a bull. But the point in all of this, in both counts of the golden calf in Exodus and the calves in 1 Kings 12, we see, in their eyes, they weren't serving other gods. They were simply using them as a mediator to Yahweh. It started out that way anyway. However, they were taking pagan practices from the nations and using them to worship Yahweh. That was something Yahweh instructed them to not do. We can't worship Him the way we want to worship Him. That's like giving your spouse what you want to receive. Think about that for a minute. If you really love someone, you want to give them what they want to receive. It doesn't matter if you like it or not. Worshiping Yahweh in the way we want is nothing but selfishness. Let that sink in. Do you serve Yahweh in only the ways that please you? In only the ways that you desire to worship Him? Have you taken on practices and traditions throughout the year that are based in pagan worship? Now, you might be using them for Him, but remember, Yahweh doesn't change. He said to not worship Him the ways the pagans worship their gods. Do you have any scripture that shows the New Testament believers doing any of the traditions that you do in worshiping or remembering Yahweh? Let me say that again. Do you have any scripture that shows the New Testament believers doing any of the traditions that you do in worshiping or remembering Yahweh? If the New Testament believers didn't follow those traditions, can you really call yourself a New Testament believer? The Pharisees took on ways and traditions that were passed down to them. They were traditions that opposed the Torah, as shown by Yeshua in Matthew 15, starting in verse 3. Jesus replied, "And why do you break the command of God for the sake of your traditions?" And in Mark 7, "You have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to the traditions of men." And He said to them, "You have a fine way of setting aside the commands of God in order to observe your own traditions." Paul used to be one of those Pharisees. Galatians 1:14. I was advancing in Judaism beyond many Jews of my own age, and was extremely zealous for the traditions of my fathers. Are you zealous for the traditions that were passed down to you? Are those traditions you hold on to found in the Scriptures as something positive, or something that derived through pagan practices? We can't let these traditions keep a tight hold on us. We have to let them go in order to worship Yahweh in His way. Colossians 2:8. See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the basic principles of this world rather than on Christ. So please, start examining your traditions today. It's so easy to justify them because of what they mean to us. But even though they're innocent in our eyes, that may not be how Yahweh looks at them. If they have any part with pagan practices at all, get rid of them. Start pursuing Yahweh according to the ways He's called us to serve Him. Well, that's all I have. Think about it. Pray about it. But more than anything, be a doer of the word and not a hearer only. Until next time, Shalom.